Moon landing.
Good evening, Zoomers. Zoomers.
What is the girl's name that sits here? Wanted to say thank you to her. Like, fixing up my.
If she comes on Zoom, I'll know what her name is.
Oh, good, thank you.
There's one of the Zooms that we did that you did not, you came up with your true first name, not your middle name. I don't know if you're using a different computer or what.
No, it depends. It all depends on the machine. The vagaries of the machine. What am I on here? And when I saw that it had my first name on it, then I changed it.
No, because
Yeah, I changed it.
not the one that came up with Edge. That
Harold.
whole Zoom session you were on.
Really?
It's,
What was wrong with me?
that's why I remembered it. Because he doesn't see it.
Clearly.
Well, next time I'll send a chat message.
I
Finally figured out how to raise my hand for Zoom. Mute and unmute, I know how to do, but raising my
Right.
hand was a new one for me.
You know what it was for me too. What was the name of it? What does he go by?
It's under that icon, the emojis,
the reactions.
Reaction.
Right. So Zoomers, we are going to be, the topic today, as was requested, is the ethics of using Nazi experimentation on human beings. And we will, I hope you did not eat before the meal, before the class. And
Snacking right now, Rabbi, sorry.
it's going to be your problem, not mine.
Okay, thanks
Okay.
for the warning.
Okay. Mel, would you begin reading, please?
Okay, following World War II, leading Nazi doctors were brought to justice before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. Since the Nuremberg trials, our society has had to confront the reality that the Nazi doctors were guilty of premeditated murder, masqueraded as research. But what is being said of the continued use of the Nazi doctors' medical research? Several scientists who have sought to use the Nazi research have stirred soul searching about social responsibility and the potential abuses of science. These incidents prompt a number of questions for the scientific community. Is it ever appropriate to use data as morally repugnant as that which was extracted from the victims of Nazism? If so, under what circumstances? The moral climate in the Jewish community is unforgiving to those who find any redeeming merit from the Nazi horrors. Anyone who dares suggest the historical
Mel?
a heretic or a
Go ahead.
sensationalist bent on distorting history, personal gain. Many in the community seriously fear that insights might replace condemnation of the Nazi evil.
Okay. Questions, comments? Yes, it is abhorrent. There's no question that it's abhorrent.
But if some good can come from just raw numbers that are printed, it might make a little bit of good coming out of such evil.
No, I don't think this is
talking about numbers. I think this is talking about the actual medical experiment.
I'm talking about the results. If they learn something scientifically valid that can help human life.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
But that is one of the issues. The experiments were very poorly designed.
Well, we're going to see.
The experiment had an intent to harm, maim, and kill.
Okay. Debbie, would you continue reading? One cannot fully confront.
One cannot fully confront the dilemma of using the results of Nazi experiments without sensitizing oneself to the images of the frozen, the injected, the inseminated, and the sterilized. The issue of whether
I should tell you, I edited this article heavily because it went into descriptions. Please keep on going.
the issue of whether to use the Nazi data is a smokescreen from the reality of human suffering. I think that answers the previous question. Instead of the word data, I suggest that we replace it with an Auschwitz bar of soap. This horrible bar of soap is the remains of murdered Jews. The image sensitizes and personalizes our dilemma. Imagine the extreme feeling of discomfort and the mortified look of horror upon discovering that one just showered with the remains of murdered Jews. The ghastly thought of the Nazis melting human beings and perhaps even one's close relatives together for a bar of soap precludes any consideration of its use. How could any civilized person divorce the horror from the carnage without numbing oneself to the screams of the tortured and ravaged faces of the Holocaust? Indeed, it is only with this enhanced sensitivity to the suffering that one can accurately deal with the Nazi data.
Okay, so that I think very well puts out the ethical dilemma, and it puts it in very, very clinging detail. But now he's going to get into a real issue, which does strain the ethics. So, would you please read?
Hitler's regime sponsored a series of inhumane experiments for alleged ideological, military, and medical purposes. They were undertaken under Heinrich Himmler's direct orders to gain knowledge of certain wartime conditions faced by the German Luftwaffe. The Nazi doctors considered military necessity adequate justification for their heinous experiments. They justified their acts by saying that the prisoners were condemned to death anyway.
Okay,
Should I continue?
please, the next paragraph.
Dr. Robert Posos is the director of a hypothermia laboratory at the University of Minnesota School of Medicine, University of Minnesota School of Medicine in Duluth. His research is devoted to methods of rewarming frozen victims of cold. Much of what he and other hypothermia specialists know about rescuing frozen victims is the result of trial and error performed in a hospital emergency room. Posos believes that many of the rewarming techniques that have been used thus far lack a certain amount of critical scientific thinking. Posos
Okay,
point-
so do you see what the issue we're about to explore is? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so this is scary. Please continue.
Posos points out that the major rewarming controversy has been between the use of passive external rewarming, which uses the patient's own body heat, and active external rewarming, which means the direct application of exogenous heat directly to the surface of the body. Hospitals have thus far microwaved frozen people, used warm blankets, induced warm fluids into body cavities through the peritoneum, the rectum, or the urinary bladder, performed coronary bypass surgery, immersed the frozen body into hot bathtubs, and used body-to-body rewarming techniques. Some victims were saved, some were lost. This may be due to the lack of legitimate information on the effects of cold on humans, since the existing data is limited to the effect of cold on animals. Animals and humans differ widely in their physiological response to cold. According to hypothermia research, accordingly, hypothermia research is uniquely dependent on human test subjects. Although Pozos has experimented on many volunteers at his hypothermia lab, he refused to allow the subject's temperature to drop more than 36 degrees. Pozos had to speculate what effects would be on a human being at a lower temperature. The only ones that put humans through extensive hypothermia research at lower temperatures were the Nazis at Dachau.
Okay, clear what the issue is? Okay, so,
Just
yeah.
for clarification, you lived 5 years. And my husband walked to shore for about a mile, a little over a mile, and took our eldest son with him. When we were
Mhm.
home. His eyelashes were
Right.
clumped together. I mean, it was horrendous.
So
It was
for-
just horrendous.
So we have a
So
couple
I
of
can
Zoomers,
imagine
right?
how this was.
We have a couple of Zoomers who came in late, so let me sum up where we've been so far. The article in question is about the ethics of not using Nazi experiments, and the first part of the article that we read makes it very clear the heinous conditions and the barbaric methods by which data was obtained, and we will be talking about whether the data was correct or not, how it was obtained. But there is one specific issue for which the Nazis have data that we do not have. And that is how to, people who have been subjected to, who are afflicted with hypothermia, how do you warm them up without killing them? And the issue is that the Nazis have a tremendous amount of data on that because they did those experiments on humans. And they, because they wanted to see how the Luftwaffe, downed pilots in the ocean, would respond and how they could save their lives. So the question that's going to be asked is, if we know that there is specific data that was obtained through the experiments of murdering hundreds and hundreds of people, but we know that that data might be able to be used to save lives today, what do we do? I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just, that's the issue.
Yeah,
Okay, comments? Bill?
I'm not sure I see it as a question. I've had a similar discussion with my son about art or other great things produced by evil people or people we don't agree with. It doesn't mean they're not evil, but it doesn't mean that some of the works or some of the information cannot be useful in the future. And I would, for me, I'm not sure I understand it as a question.
I'm not sure I understand what you just said.
What I say is if we've got good data that's valid, that it and can be used for good, despite the fact that it was obtained in heinous ways, I think that we can use what information we have. I don't think we can get more information in that method, but if we have it, I think it's, and it can help others, I think it's almost, we're almost compelled to use it.
Okay, Debbie and then Mel. Debbie, you're on mute.
I'm trying to unmute.
You just
To
did.
me, while it was obtained through heinous means, better that we use that data for good than those people died in vain. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Mel?
It's to the point.
No, and then-
Well, I think all three of us are in agreement that to save a human life saves the world. Yes, this was awful and it never should have happened and it never should be even thought of as repeated. But if you can still save a life in the future, you're remiss if you don't.
Yes. For me, the question is to think of the people who died during the experiments as agents
Mhm.
and ask them.
Uh-oh.
Gathered from your death. I realize that it's pretty nearly impossible to do that, but we do have to think about it. What would you like for me to do with the data that was gathered from you? Would you
Mhm.
like for me to have access to it?
Okay.
FDA, from Canada, every country's medical has a regulatory agency that is very descriptive in terms of how studies must be done in order to be accepted, including empirical data. None of what was done during Nazi Germany meets those requirements because we don't even know how much of that data is actually valid.
And he's going to get into that as we go forward. But, okay. Yeah.
I just say that because are we going to base a current medical decision on iffy data? Or data that somebody might have inflated just to get the reward that they saw within their own shtetl?
Okay.
And also, that's really interesting. Today. What's going on with COVID and how much was covered up and how much was misused? What kind of data was not given?
Okay. So now when we study ethics, remember, we go into some very interesting places. So Phil, you brought up, if I understand what you said correctly, that there is, while an evil person might do evil deeds, the deed, if the evil person does a deed that could have benefit to humankind, we do not associate the deed with the person. And if we can use the deed to our benefit. So then, Phil, you would then say that the Israeli Philharmonic under Zubin Mehta playing Wagner would be okay. Because Wagner, besides being a vicious anti-Semite, was the music that was played in the concentration camps. But that music would be okay.
That's not the same thing. That's not what I'm saying.
Don't put your hands on your head.
Okay. No, the answer is I'm not quite saying that.
Well, would you say that Wagner's music should not be held hostage to what Wagner was?
I
Because
am
that's
saying
about the-
not exactly. What
Okay.
I am saying, and let me say what I'm saying.
And by the way,
That's okay.
I'm
And I
putting,
think that's a very good, a good conundrum, and I'll tell you my answer to that. What
Yeah,
I'm
but-
saying is that
that you're in a trap.
Wagner, Nazi,
Worse.
can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Evil person, bad things. I think that he created great music. I think it's okay to appreciate great music or an artist who's evil. Now, does that mean that if he created a piece that was used to celebrate the torture of others and symbolizes that torture, that same piece should be used for others when it has a symbol and association with heinous action, I think that's a different issue. I don't think, in other words, I think that it can be a great piece, but if it's been used and is associated with a horrible act, and especially to the people and symbolic and reminds the survivors of that, I think that that's entirely a different issue. And it doesn't mean that the piece isn't great, but that it should not be used in that way.
What Miguel said before was that really the only way that we could decide whether to use the data or not is to ask the people from whom the data was taken. Granted, they're dead and we're not Kabbalists, but many of them had relatives who survived. So what, Miguel, would you then be suggesting that they should make the decision as to whether the data should be used or not?
Well, in a way, that's what we do in an ethics consult. When the patient is not competent. in this
You go to
case,
the
the
next
patient is
person, you go to
dead,
the next.
We go to the oldest male relative.
So Phil, based on what Miguel said, here's the question. And that is, if you just said that Wagner's music is not connected to Wagner unless the specific pieces of music were used in a way that would cause harm, and that the playing of that music would harm the people, would cause harm to them, then what if the use of Nazi experimental data would cause serious emotional harm to the relatives of those people who died through medical experimentation? Does that affect your answer?
No, in this case, I think that if there's another way, if we have the data elsewhere, if we have access to that type of information, but if we do not have access to that information, I think it has to be analyzed and used appropriately. In other words, it's got to be good data, but if you have someone who's got a core body temperature of 80 degrees in Fahrenheit, and we I have some experience from training with some of this, not that low, but
I hear what you're saying.
Information can be helpful and it might save lives. And I think that to save a life in the future, I don't think that I would not agree. I think that the physical versus, especially today.
Wasn't it true, isn't it true that Israel would not play Wagner?
Until Zubin Mehta played Wagner.
Right.
Until he did it. They refused to play it until
He did it.
I find Phil's comment interesting when he has taken an oath that says first do no harm.
So Phil, did you hear that?
I didn't.
Okay, so Susan asked the question, if a doctor has taken an oath,
Okay.
cause no harm,
Okay.
is the harm that is caused the emotional harm and trauma that can be caused by using the data? Does that in any way affect the ethical use of the data to potentially save lives?
I think that you're doing harm if you don't use the data. And the harm is potentially less than if you do, especially in the distant future. I think that it's true that the loved one was tortured, the loved one
Okay, Phil,
was used inappropriately, but I think that
I'm just
the
asking the question.
information does not belong to the loved one.
Okay, all right. So does everyone understand now why people who get into ethics drink a lot? Okay, Mel, your hand is up, and then Miguel.
Yes, I would like to think, what if I was the parent of a person who needed this treatment in order to save their life 100 years after, almost 100 years after the Nazi experimentation, and the doctor said, I can't refer to it because it might offend the second generation attitudes of,
Mhm.
no, doesn't work for me. Saving a life is what we've got to do with what we've got. It was corrupt, miserable stuff that, but if we've got data to save a life, we are required to use it.
Okay, Miguel.
Yes, first a comment in relation to
Yeah.
do no harm, primum non nocere.
Illegitimatio noli carborundum.
Even Mengele
Yeah.
had said some sort of an oath. So what happened was after around 1948, 49, the World Medical Association had to come up with an entirely new oath
Yes.
because the so-called Hippocratic oath was completely useless. But the other question that has more to do with what Phil and maybe Mel have been saying is, would they, Phil and Mel, consider photographs and cinema part of the data? Because we don't just have numbers on pages, we have video, not video, but
Well, we have film.
films, we have photographs of all of these
But
experiments.
these experiments were not done for the sake of scientific data. These experiments were done for the sake of torture and amusement.
Well, and another thing that the rabbi said also, you know, this guy Rascher, who's mentioned here, they had their careers, you know, and they wanted to satisfy the Führer.
They were held by the commons.
So they were doing things that they may not have done otherwise
But they
to advance
also
their
may have
careers.
manipulated that data. based
Well,
on-
So let's continue because we have some obstacles to deal with. So Miguel, would you read? The Nazis immersed their subjects.
The Nazis immersed their subjects into vats of ice water at sub-zero temperatures, or left them out to freeze in the winter cold. As the prisoners excreted mucus, fainted, and slipped into unconsciousness, the Nazis meticulously recorded the changes in their body temperature, heart rate, muscle response, and urine. The Nazis attempted rewarming the frozen victims. Dr. Rascher did in fact discover an innovative, rapid active rewarming technique in resuscitating the frozen victims. This technique completely contradicted the popularly accepted method of slow, passive rewarming. Rascher found his active rewarming in hot liquids to be the most efficient means of revival. The Nazi data on hypothermia experiments would apparently fill gaps in Posso's research. Perhaps it contained information necessary to rewarm effectively frozen victims whose body temperatures were below 36 degrees. Posso's obtained a long-suppressed Alexander report on the hypothermia experiments at Dachau. He planned to analyze for publication the Alexander report, along with his evaluation to show the possible applications of Nazi experiments of modern hypothermia research. Of the Dachau data, Posso said, it could advance my work, and it takes human subjects farther than we're willing. Posso's plan to republish the Nazi data in the New England Journal of Medicine was flatly vetoed by the journal editor, Dr. Arnold Rillman. Rillman refused to publish Nazi data along with Posso's comments. Was understandable given the source of the Nazi data and the way it was obtained.
So this is the quote. that I don't want to have to use Nazi data, but there is no other and will be no other in an ethical world. I've rationalized it a bit, but not to use it would be equally bad. I'm trying to make something constructive out of it. I use it with my guard up, but it's useful. Okay, this is a fascinating dilemma because
Yes.
with reasons. So I'm going to return to the issue of emotional distress. And I'm going to return to, because Phil brings up, and Phil's point is excellent, is that what people do is not necessarily who they are. Although in Judaism, we believe that what you do, you are what you do. But by disassociating the actions with the person, it allows us to enjoy some of the actions or derive enjoyment from it, like Wagner. I can tell you that I love, you know what Mark Twain said about Wagner? He has his moments and he has his hours. So I do play Wagner. I don't play the hours, I play the moments. But here's, I listen to him, yes, Mahler, but not everything. I'm much more Brahms, Beethoven. So, and Gershwin. We can't leave Gershwin out. So, but that said, what happens if there is a liturgical piece that is problematic for a certain group of people, yet we love the piece?
Amazing Grace is an example. It was a drinking song.
Yeah, but I don't know many people who are upset by drinking. No, I'm going to make it much worse. Mizmor le David, havula na 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 ay na na na. Who wrote that? Who wrote the tune? Shlomo Carlebach. Shlomo Carlebach, the pedophile.
You told us about it.
No. So here's the question. Most people don't know that Carlebach wrote that tune, and it is arguably one of the most popular tunes of our liturgy, especially the Kabbalat Shabbat, the Friday night liturgy. But yes, he wrote, yep. So do we continue to use Carlebach tunes knowing that they were written by a pedophile?
Interesting.
We do.
Yeah.
I know what we do. I'm asking.
Some synagogues, they have Karma Shabbats.
That's right.
The question for the ritual committee. Leave it to the ritual committee.
I'm not serious, but what if we say, but this pedophile was Jewish?
We have
Phil, your hand is up.
It is. This is
Your
where
hand
I
is
get back to the separation of the work, the creation, from the evil that the author does. The piece is not evil. The piece is brilliant, much like maybe a movie from Weinstein more recently, or others. There are people who've done very bad things and they're evil people, but it doesn't mean that they haven't created good works that can't be used and appreciated without paying homage to the evil that the creator did.
Okay, so
That's
Phil,
what I believe.
Phil, this,
was done for the purpose of evil.
Phil,
Yes.
this is what's happening in the United States today.
Okay.
There are people who are approaching the cantors and the rabbis who are saying, we have been sexually abused in our childhood.
Mhm.
We know that Carlebach was a pedophile. And if you sing Carlebach tunes, we can't be in the sanctuary. It's too painful.
Okay,
Okay, so what do you do?
I don't play it.
Okay, so, but that only causes them emotional distress.
But what's the upside? Is somebody's life being saved? In other words, I'm not doing a pikuach nefesh here. I think it's just a matter of, yes, if this causes trauma, then what am I going to get out of it? That would be my approach.
Okay. Anyone else comments?
Somebody else might think that.
Yeah. I'm in violent agreement with Phil.
Rivka was saying something.
Some people would say that I should do it anyway, and that person be let out of the sanctuary
Mhm.
or be forewarned.
And probably not walk into the sanctuary again.
It's a
Right.
possibility.
Yes. Okay.
Before we get too far, I want to go back to the quotation from Dr. Pozos.
Okay, but hold on. Then
Okay.
Mel had his hand. Mel, you had your hand up.
I was agreeing with Phil. That's primarily, frankly, the psychic, if you've got people who are that, we actually in our synagogue had something pretty darn close to it. And it was by in the musical field also. And I know how we dealt with it.
Right, but that was an individual, not a composer.
Correct.
Okay. I was extrapolating. Miguel, and then Susan, did you want to say something?
If we're talking about
Well, hold on, then Miguel goes first. Go ahead.
He says, I have rationalized it a bit. Why a bit? He rationalized it.
A lot.
When you rationalize, it's like in medical school, they said, you cannot be kind of pregnant.
Can be a little bit.
You are or you're not. Okay, but I find a lot of what I would call the hubris of
Mhm.
the modern man in Pozos' statement,
Mhm.
because ethics is clearly defining a limit beyond which you may not go. I would think this is one of those things, going back to Zubin Mehta, that, like you have said with a lot of humor, we don't do it until we do it.
Until we do it, right?
This is stop there. And another thing,
Well,
it's-
Miguel and I are about to have a major confrontation. So, and it's about the definition of ethics. So, would you give me your definition of ethics again?
Okay, I hope I don't make it very complex, but it's.
Go for it.
The word ethos originally meant
Right.
abode.
Mhm.
An abode is a human construction. It's different from a cave. You can live in a cave or you can construct your abode. And it acquired its modern meaning or its present meaning, whatever, because your ethics is something that you construct,
Mhm.
and you construct, and the idea is to construct a person that consistently and habitually chooses the good.
Okay, so that's fascinating, because the next question I want to ask you, but I'm not going to, but I'm going to ask it anyway, but I'm not going to look for an answer, is then what's the difference between ethics and morals? So my definition of ethics, which I got from my professors, was ethics is the guide that gives you a direction when there is no right answer. And those are different. These are very different, because to you, ethics is much more black and white, and to me, ethics is gray.
Well, it is great.
And to me,
too.
it's,
Yeah.
It is
something
great to me,
different
too.
altogether.
What is it to you?
I think to ethics, when you were describing it as an abode, I think that the human body, the human soul, the human mind does things at the time that it's needed. So that I think that your ethics will probably, it's not constant.
Mhm.
And your morals may be more ethical than your ethics.
Mhm. Susan, you wanted to say something? Okay. Have you thought about it yet? Oh, just jump in, jump in. No, we're right there. We're right there.
Okay, then let's go back to the Nazi topic. And for
Okay.
me, I can accept that bad people do some really, really good things. And we can separate those things from the bad person. I can do that. I can peel apart that layer. However, what was done in Nazi Germany was not done by people for moral, ethical, and upstanding reasons at all. There was nothing ethical about it. There was nothing moral about it. There was nothing human about it.
Right.
So to take that and use that application in support of or to fill in the gap of medical data, no, I'm sorry, that doesn't work.
Okay, so if you would keep on reading, if the experiments, Phil, I see your hand is up, but I want to go through the next couple
Yeah,
of
go
paragraphs.
ahead. I had glanced at this earlier and I think this is good stuff.
If the experiments were conducted in an ethical manner and the results be considered scientifically reliable. In recent years, there has been a sharp debate regarding the scientific validity of the experiments and whether data gathered from the experiments on unwilling subjects could be used in any way by the scientific community. To begin the analysis, one must address the Nazi experiment's scientific validity and the medical competence of the experiment.
You said that before.
If the experiments were conducted in an unethical manner, can the results be considered scientifically reliable? In recent years, there has been a sharp debate regarding the scientific validity of the experiments and whether data gathered from lethal experiments on
Yes, you
unwilling
did.
subjects.
I thought you were.
Repeat the paragraph.
My apologies.
Okay.
All right, so go to despite.
Despite the arguments that the Nazi experiments were unscientific, the data does exist.
I thought you were doing that.
Although the data is morally tainted and soaked with the blood of its victims, one cannot escape confronting the dreaded possibility that perhaps the doctors at Dachau actually learned something that today can help save lives or benefit society.
Okay, Phil, your hand is up.
Yes, so I think that, whether something is, it might have been obtained in an unethical manner, but that's entirely different as to whether there's validity or not. I think they're two different issues. I think that you need to use the statistical and scientific measures of the data to determine, and the experiments to determine whether it's a valid experiment. I think that whether it was ethical was not relevant. Does that mean that I would think that, we certainly have ethics committees and, in terms of the research that we do, we can't, prospectively, but if I have a collection of data, whether it's valid or not is not related to whether it was obtained by torture, or I would say if it's valid. And that's what needs to be determined is, that much like anything else, if the data is false because of the way it was obtained, that's one thing, but whether it's valid is not related to whether it was obtained
Okay,
in a desirable manner.
Mel's hand is raised and then Miguel.
Let us accept the fact that it's totally unethical, but frankly, it would be unethical to gather data by us. We're trying to be ethical. The only way this data was could be gathered, as far as we currently know, even a century later, is to do it unethically. Now, but the fact that the data exists and can be useful to save lives today, we would be remiss not to use it.
Miguel.
3 quick comments I think I need to make. First, also lacks imagination, because we can simulate all kinds of things today in a computer. I remember many years ago, I visited the McMaster Medical School, and they had 2 simulators that allowed the students to manipulate the simulator and find out what was going to happen to people. That was number 1. Number 2, this thing about data does exist. Yes, that is correct. There are numbers or whatever they are, but data can be true positive, false positive, true negative, or false negative. So we don't know that. And then this idea that one cannot escape the confronting the dreaded possibility. I would never make a decision as an ethicist based on a possibility. I need a measure, and that's a probability. Okay, so there is a possibility, but what is the probability that we will, that what the doctors learn at that cow can actually be used to help people or to benefit society today?
So yeah, they were doctors. So whether they were doctors, but there are 2 things that I'll throw a couple of monkey wrenches in, just because. The first is this reminds me, what we're talking about reminds me, there was a big scandal at the National Institute of Health in DC, which, if you're familiar with NIH, is the governmental research hospital or institution. But there was a tremendous, I had a good friend who used to work there as a researcher, and he used to enjoy showing me the catalogs of how they, of equipment that they would order. And the thing that really got us was, you could buy a rat emulsifier. Think about that for a second. You could buy a rat emulsifier. It was just a Cuisinart. That's all it was. But right. Well, because after they were experimenting on the rats. So, but the scandal was that one of the researchers, one of their top cancer researchers, had falsified his data for years, and they found him out. And when they approached him and they accused him, he admitted that he falsified the data. And when they confronted him with that and they asked him what was his motivation, he said, well, you're all infidels anyway. I only care about Muslims because I'm a Muslim. So if some of my data caused harm to you, that's fine with me. So, it is it's a cautionary tale about how the data was brought in, how it was arrived at. But if we're talking about facts, though, the first fact is that the data does exist. Whether it's good data or not is a different issue, but the data does exist. And the other monkey wrench is, if they don't experiment on humans, what are they experimenting on?
Other
Animals.
beings.
Animals. In the beginning of not another human. It said at the very beginning of the article that they experiment on animals. So the question then, one of the side ethical question becomes, if we don't at least examine the data that they have to determine whether or not it might be usable, we are going to be experimenting on animals. Now, I don't know how you feel about animals, depends on the animal, but in today's world, that is a major issue.
Yeah.
And it has to be thrown into the equation as well. Yeah.
Just a footnote. There was a researcher here at the medical school in San Antonio who was researching on chimps.
Mhm.
He felt very guilty, and in order to relieve himself of his guilt, he invented a liturgy. After the monkey was dead, he would go through the liturgy in which he told the cadaver of the monkey, you gave up your life for the good of society and this and that and the other, and that allowed him to keep his moral integrity.
So how did the monkey feel?
Ask the monkey.
I looked it up on Google.
Yeah,
I wanted to know, I asked, what is the definition of moral? And then I was gonna ask the definition of ethics,
mhm.
but it came up as both.
Yes, because morality and morals and ethics, many of the dictionaries tend to be, they're confused, but they're not.
They're
right.
not, they are not.
Right.
Society, morals are the society standards of right and wrong. And they're similar.
Yes.
Ethics, a structured a system of principles that govern appropriate conduct for a group, including activities such as professional ethics, compassion, commitment.
Which, by the way, agrees with what you said and with what I said, but they're different facets.
But that was interesting.
Okay, so Rivka, if you would continue reading then with author Christine Moe. Thank you for the definition.
Despite the argument, where are we? Okay. Author Christine Moe suggested that by using the hypothermia experimental data, good would be derived from the evil. Quote, nor, however, should we let the inhumanity of such experiments blind us to the possibility that some good may be salvaged from the ashes. So can I stop for a minute? I think that today we see that almost in the political arena.
Yeah.
I see some people are just, there's conservatives who are willing to sort of play with moral and ethics that serve them.
Mhm.
And then there are the strict left, which are, they're known as liberals, and they own, that's their religion. That's what they do. And then there's the extreme right,
Mhm.
and they're out there. They're going to do whatever they want.
Mhm.
So we see the same thing.
Yes, things have not changed.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
I have to say
okay.
that. Okay. What kind of good could be salvaged from the victim's ashes? What societal benefit, if any, could be so compelling to justify using the Nazi data? Arguably, when the wickedness of the experiment has been very great, and only a colossally important objective can justify its use. Those that wish to use the data have to satisfy the burden of proof, which becomes greater in proportion to the wickedness of the experiment. Whoa, okay.
Keep going.
This is a good time to remind us that the Nazis experimented on many areas. This is only one very specific issue that data exists.
Right.
No one's suggesting that any of the other experiments were worthwhile in any way whatsoever.
Right.
The question is, this very specific may have practical applications and save lives.
Right. That says.
Okay, please continue.
It's easy to see the futility of advocating the data's use when the intended benefit to society is trivial and moderate. Conversely, if the intended benefit is to save lives, most would agree that the data should be used.
Mhm.
In Igros Moshe, Even Hatzer, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Moshe, was asked whether one can listen and give credit to the songs composed by a heretic, not because. In response, Rabbi Moshe distinguished between the holy and the non-holy matters. He held that holy objects, such as the Torah scrolls, Tefillin, and the Zuzot, etc., that were prepared by an apicurus cannot be used. The moral character and level of religious observance of the scribe is very relevant to the holy's subsequent use, perhaps because of the many fundamental religious laws and prayers that are incorporated into the Bible.
So,
Songs, however,
right,
are devoid of any holiness, and therefore can be listened to and enjoyed in lieu of its composer's benefits. While it is not advisable to listen to the words of a wicked person, there is no halachic sanction against it. Reb Moshe compared the non-holiness of songs to other mundane objects, such as machines, inventions, and medicines. In such cases, the religiosity and the moral fiber of the composer, mechanic, inventor, and scientist is completely irrelevant to the object's subsequent use. People have no religious expectations, nor do they seek any religious fulfillment from an inanimate object. Therefore, Reb Moshe allows their use, even though they were created by the.
one last paragraph.
Therefore, there is a potential halachic basis to permit the use of the German Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen automobiles, the Dachau rewarming techniques, the Klauberg fertility treatment, the Heismeyer tuberculosis treatment, and even the Mengele data on genetics. Halachically, the data could be used in lieu of its abominable origins.
Right, now, the key word here is potential.
Potential.
Potential. No, it's the potential halachic basis. Because
Moshe's one.
let me give you an example of potential halachic basis. Why are Jews for Jesus not considered Jewish?
Because they believe in Jesus.
Yes, they do. They believe in Jesus as,
I'm taking a step back.
Right.
Jewish, you're Jewish. You can have beliefs whether they're correct or incorrect, but if you were born a Jew, you're still a Jew.
They were not, but they were not.
but there are Jews who have converted to Jews for Jesus.
And they didn't. Born a Jew,
So
always a Jew.
why is it,
What?
right,
Choose-
but that doesn't mean you can be counted in a minion,
Sure.
by the way. So why is the belief in Jesus not acceptable in Judaism?
because Other religions perceive him as the Messiah.
Idolatry.
No, you're not.
Idolatry, Phil?
It's about.
Idolatry and more than one God. I mean, we're
Mark,
getting back to the Trinity and what does that mean? And
But the Jews for Jesus do not necessarily accept the Trinity.
No.
And nor do they use icons.
so are we saying that they accept Jesus as the same God as the God that we do, just in different form? Is it that there's more than one God? Is
No.
it that,
Phil?
yes,
For the first 2 centuries after the death of Jesus, there were Christians who were also Jewish, and they were
Okay.
accepted. So there is historical precedent for someone believing in Jesus to be Jewish. And if you say that the belief in a human being being elevated to God is idolatrous, then why is Chabad
Oh,
Jewish? Now, I'm not asking for answers.
That's
Right,
very good.
you see that? Yeah, stuck the knife in.
Like that.
Okay, so the question then becomes, and one of the things that Chabad, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe died,
He was.
Actually,
the
he-
Mashiach.
he didn't really die, as we know.
I never
Do you
said
know
he
why they have a
was.
20, by the way, Phil, Mel,
we've talked about this.
do you know why there's 24, you would appreciate this, but no one else will like it. But Mel, do you know why there's a 24-hour guard around the Rebbe's grave? Yeah, there is a 24-hour guard around the Ohel. Do you know why? Mel, you're on mute, I think.
Is this a joke or is it something serious?
Would I kid you?
I do, in case of resurrect.
My wife has
Somebody
a
can,
close relative who was buried right near where he's buried. So I've seen it in person.
But do you know why there are 24-hour guards?
I do.
He's been receiving death threats. Okay, so that's my Lubavitch joke for the day.
Bad news.
But the problem But the problem is, that you see, theologically, the problem is you can make a really good case for someone being able to be Jewish and counted in a minyan if they're a Jew for Jesus. But the reason we can't accept them as being Jewish is because we have 2,000 years of persecution that we have to deal with first. So it's really political and sociological, but it's not theological necessarily. And Lubavitch proved that. So the question then is, yes, there is a potential halachic basis that someone believing in Jesus could be Jewish, but that's potential. And this is where ethics deals with halakha, where, no, sorry, if you believe in Jesus, you can't be Jewish. Why? Because for the past 2,000 years, you've been killing us. So you don't get to do this. It's the same thing with the halachic basis of Nazi experimentation, which is that halakhically, I might be able to do it, but politically, there is no way that I, as a rabbi, would be comfortable saying that we should use it. Now, in truth, I happen to think that in this very specific case, because, and this is my opinion, because there is the potential for saving lives. I know that you want clarification and you want concrete, but if there's a potential for saving a life, I think that you have to use whatever data you have.
Right. That's exactly where I went.
No,
No.
that's the problem. We just don't know. And
So we can't draw the line of corruption into this.
well, it may be about 20 years too early to draw the line of corruption because we still have survivors. And so, and one other thing before, it was interesting that, I think I've mentioned this before, but my father, who flew in a B-24 in the South Pacific, to his dying day, would not drive or get into a Japanese car, but he owned a Volkswagen.
Yeah,
Wow.
And in Israel, they
Mercedes.
They're all.
They're all Mercedes. Now, when I asked my father, you know, how can you own a Volkswagen when, and you won't get into a Japanese car? His answer was, exactly what Phil was saying, which is, it's a car. It's a good car. It's a car that I'm comfortable driving, but I will not get into a Japanese car because I saw what they did. No one ever accused my father of being consistent, but it's a very real human thing, which is,
Sure.
father experienced firsthand what was going on in the South
That's-
Pacific.
That's the moral insight.
That's right. There, Miguel.
I don't know if I should waste everybody's time making this comment, but I'll.
Okay,
Okay.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. No, no, about the usefulness of the data, early on said some of the people survived, some of them did not. It reminded me of my microbiology book,
Mhm.
which was Dr. Zinzer's biology book, microbiology book. It talked about in India, they used to treat leprosy
Yes, yeah,
with an oil which
Yes.
was called oil of chalmugra. And 30% of the people were getting better. 70% were not, but at least 30% of them were getting better until somebody said, hey, wait a minute, let's see what happens. You know, we have an experimental group and the control group and all that. And in the control group, with no treatment, 30% got better.
right.
So when early on it says some survived, some did not, I was thinking oil of
That's right.
chalmugra.
You don't know. And by the way,
People in hospitals, same thing. They
the,
get the same treatment.
that's right, or they don't,
You
or
don't know.
Zinzer microbiology textbook is on sale at $12.14 on Amazon. If you want to know.
Buy it, it's a classic.
That's right. It's a classic, but I'm going to wait for the movie. But you're right. You're right. We don't know. And that's the problem. We don't know. It's one of the issues. But that can be used either way. We don't know. This is It's about 10 years old.
And photos is still considered. a
That I-
requirement?
That I don't know. I don't know anything about him.
But Reb Moshe's answer,
Yeah. Reb Moshe's answer, even though it's at least 50 years old,
Yeah.
but it's still,
it holds up.
it does hold up. Yeah.
One last thing.
Yeah.
The opening statement at the Nuremberg trials was made by Justice Jackson, who was
Yes.
an American and who was the prosecutor. I don't know it, the whole opening statement, but he says something like, the wrongs we seek to to convict are so heinous and of such a magnitude that humanity cannot afford for them to be repeated. And this is, I kept also thinking about Justice Jackson as I was reading this. Can we really afford to repeat the Nazi experiments?
And with that,
You remember the old movie? Old Lady?
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. I don't care.
yeah.
Excellent.
So,
It's only like 40 minutes long.
right, next week, we will be starting the laws of, at a request, we're starting the laws of tzedakah. We might take 2 weeks on that, might be 2 weeks, but we're going to be using, the Shulchan Aruch and going over the laws of tzedakah. I think you'll be surprised. And then after that, I've been asked about Lashon Hara.
Yeah.
Ah,
We're going through the laws of Lashon Hara, and there'll be a lab on Lashon Hara. So we're going to practice it on each other.
Great.
Okay. All right, Zoomers, we'll see ya.
Yashikoa.
Thank you, Rabbi.
care.
thank you.
Yashikoa.
Lila